Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Technical Rejection Criteria for Study Data. Are you ready? For those of you who don't know WAYS, we partner with life sciences teams and help to compile, manage, submit, and maintain regulatory submissions to health authorities around the world. Our client base is currently a little over 50 companies, and we are best known for our simple and practical approach to delivering our services. Our clients get direct access to our subject matter experts. You always get the A team. We will be recording the presentation today, and we'll make the link available on our website later in the week. If you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to use the chat feature to submit them, and we'll go through them at the end of the presentation. If we don't have an answer for you, we'll make sure to follow up when we get one. And speaking of the A team, our presenter is Shannon Heacock, Senior Director, Regulatory Operations at WAYS. Shannon has 15 years of experience in regulatory operations and specializes in eCTD, global submission management, eCTD technical requirements, and data standards requirements. Throughout her career, she has led teams responsible for managing and submitting thousands of investigational and marketing application submissions to the FDA, Health Canada, and European health authorities. I will now turn it over to Shannon to begin the presentation.
Wonderful. Thanks, Vanessa, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for actually WAYS' first webinar. We thought there was no better time since you don't have to do your taxes today. Why not give you a free webinar and really touch on a hot topic that has been around for a few years, but the longer it goes on, the more people are anxious to know about really what is the technical rejection criteria and what do you need to know about it to make sure that you're ready once it goes into effect. So for our presentation today, we are going to go over what exactly is the technical rejection criteria. You might hear me refer to it as the TRC because I cannot keep saying technical rejection criteria over and over again. We'll also discuss how it may impact your submissions. And if it is going to impact your submissions, what are some steps to take and things to consider as you move forward? And then finally, we'll also touch on the latest message we've heard from the FDA regarding this topic. As Vanessa mentioned, if you have any questions, just use the chat box and we can cover everything once we go through the slides. So to start, what exactly is the technical rejection criteria? So this is criteria being added to the existing validation criteria to ensure you are submitting standardized data when applicable for your clinical and non-clinical study reports. Now, the most important thing I can tell you leaving this webinar is to please keep in mind these two dates. It is not by accident that I'm going to say these two dates over and over again as we go through the different slides, because they are just that important for you to know. The first date is any sponsor that has a study that started after December 17th, 2016, and you are intending to submit a marketing application. You must have those studies in standardized data format. So when I say that, I mean CDISC compliant, so SCTM, ATOM, and SEND data. Now, if you have studies for a commercial IND, you're required to submit standardized data if the study started after December 17th, 2017. So if you have a commercial IND, then you get 1 extra year of lead time. Now, keep in mind, for non-clinical studies, the start date for a study is the date the study director signed off or approved the protocol. For a clinical study, it is the earliest date of informed consent among the subjects that enrolled in the study. So that's just key information to keep in mind as we move forward in the presentation. The idea of this webinar is as we go through each slide, I really want you to think about your company's program and how the different bits of information we cover are going to affect you knowing about your company goals and the studies that you have in-house. So there are 4 additional criteria numbers being added to the validation criteria. The first is number 1734, and this is looking for a data set named ts.xpt or you might hear it referred to as a trial summary data set. This is going to be one of the most important data sets you can submit to your application, because what it's telling the agency is the actual study start date for that study. So it's going to set off a chain of reactions that lets the agency know, okay, was the study start date prior to those dates that we mentioned earlier? If so, then they do not need to expect to receive the standardized data packages. Or if they see the date and it falls after the requirement, then they know to really look at your application, and they're looking to make sure that you're submitting SDTM, ATOM, and/or SEND data. Keep in mind, these criteria, they fall under the technical rejection criteria. So if you're not meeting any of these, your submission is automatically going to be rejected, and it may not get into the reviewer's hands. So it's really important that we pay attention to the 4 criteria. The next one, 1735, it's ensuring that you're using the correct study tagging files when submitting standardized data. So again, SDTM, SEND, and ATOM. They also want to make sure that your defined files and any corresponding information is tagged correctly as well. As we move on, for 1736, this is your demographic data. They want to make sure that the demographic data is included in your standardized packages for SEND, SDTM. And when it comes to your ATOM, you have your subject level data. And finally, 1789, this is ensuring that each study you submit within your program has a corresponding study tagging file. Now, you might be looking at this and thinking, we've had to create study tagging files for US submissions this whole time. I would have assumed that this would have been in the criteria already. Well, I assumed the same thing, and I did a double take when I saw it. But now, again, because it's part of the technical rejection criteria, if you have a report that does not have an SDTF, it's going to get bounced back to you, as opposed to just having a warning and the agency giving you the time to update the warning that you had and move forward. All right, so now that we understand what is part of the technical rejection criteria, let's see how and if it will impact your submissions. So first, when the TRC came out, a lot of folks got nervous because they really just said, all right, non-clinical and clinical data must submit standardized data. Well, depending on your program, that can be a lot of information. So they actually broke it down to just specific sections within the modules of when you need to submit the data. So you see, mostly for non-clinical, it's your toxicology studies and your CARC. And then for the clinical studies, you do have a few more sections. But again, it is broken down a little bit so that you can really just focus on specific studies within the clinical section. So keeping in mind the studies that you have, do any of them fall into these specific sections? If so, let's take it a step further and see what work then needs to be done. We'll start with an easy one. So if you have a CBER application and you are submitting an IND, right now you can take a sigh of relief because you do not have any work to do at this time. Doesn't mean you can rest on your laurels. It just means you can take a breath and think about what you might need to do in the future. If you're submitting a marketing application to CBER, then you do not have to submit any standardized data for your non-clinical reports. But if you do have clinical reports, they are going to be expecting to see something. So if you have a study that started prior to December 17, 2016, and you are submitting other XPT files, they're going to expect to see that trial summary data set included. If you have a study that started after that date, then they are going to expect to see SCTM and ATOM data. Now, this differs a little bit from what CDER is expecting, because we see here that for your marketing application, you only need to submit the simplified TS data set if you're submitting other files, other XPT files. You might have folks that refer to them as legacy data sets. Now, CDER is a little different. You have a little more work to do. If you have a commercial IND, and again, I warned you, I'm going to keep saying these dates over and over again. Feel free to say them with me if you're sitting there at home, just to really get into your memory. But if you have an IND and the study started prior to December 17th, 2017, you do not need to submit standardized data. However, you must submit a simplified TS data set, regardless if you're submitting other data sets or not. If it started after the date, then they are going to expect to see a send data package. Reminder, the TS data set, its prime purpose is to let the agency know about the start date. So if your non-clinical study started, the study director signed it on December 18th, 2017, then you need to submit send data. If they signed it on December 16th, 2017, then they still want to see that simplified data set. For clinical studies for an IND, you do not need to take any action at this time. Now, if you're submitting marketing applications to CDER, you can just assume that you need to submit something with the study, regardless if it's non-clinical or clinical. Keep in mind, it still is only impacting those specific sections we talked about earlier. For non-clinical, if it started prior to December 17, 2016, you only need to submit the simplified TS dataset. Again, regardless if you're submitting other data or not. And the same goes for your clinical studies. If you have studies that started after December 17th, 2016, they want to see the standardized data packages. I cannot say this enough because really this is the bread and butter of the technical rejection criteria. So if you are not meeting these requirements, there is a good chance that you're not going to get a warning or anything like that, but the agency is just going to bounce back your submission. All right. Hopefully we really understand now the requirement, and let's talk about thinking of your program. Are you impacted? I would say the majority of the folks on this call probably will be, whether it's now or at some point in the future. So let's think about some things we can do proactively to really ensure that you're ready to submit when you need to. The first thing I would suggest is meet with any clinical and non-clinical stakeholders within your company. So, some folks think those in regulatory or reg ops specifically, they do not need to meet super ahead of time in the process. That's not the case. This impacts everybody from start to finish. So really you want to get the whole team together to really understand what exactly is involved in your program, which studies, where do you think they'll fall, and also what study IDs will be utilized within the study report and the data. I say this because you want the study ID used within your data sets to match the study ID used in your metadata. So it's important to have that conversation ahead of time, because I know, for example, when I receive documents right as maybe we're a couple weeks out of submission, I put them in with one study ID only later to get the data package and find that within the data set it's referencing a different ID. That clash in information can result in some questions from the agency, or it may impact your validation. So once you have gathered all this information, it's important to create a data standardization plan. This plan is going to outline all the studies that you've discussed. You're going to talk about the study start dates that are involved so that then you can determine if it needs standardized data, if it just needs the simplified TS data set, or if you're also going to be providing legacy data. Once you have all of that information, it's important to submit the study data standardization plan to the agency as soon as possible. The idea is you want to get their buy-in on your plan as soon as you can prior to your submission. That way, if they request any updates, then you have time to react to those updates that they're requesting. Or if they agree on your plan, then you know ahead of time that you're submitting with information that they agree to, and you do not need to run around last minute to make any updates. So here's an example of this data, standardized data, study data standardization plan. Say that 5 times fast. As I mentioned, you want to identify the study identifier, your study start date, and then that'll help you fill in the rest of the table. This is an example of a table. I've seen many different versions, but really this table is giving the agency enough information that they shouldn't come back to you with any surprises. And also when you go to submit, they're not going to be surprised about what they're finding. So the more information you give them ahead of time, the better. And for INDs, we would suggest you submit this plan with your general investigational plan. If you really want to be proactive, you can always send it in with a pre-IND briefing package. But for marketing applications, you also want to submit it to the IND, typically with your pre-NDA meeting package. But for CBER, they do suggest that you send it for their review no later than the end of phase 2 meeting. So again, it gives everybody plenty of time to get on the same page. So now that you have the plan and you start to receive deliverables from your, whether it's a vendor or an internal non-clinical or clinical expert, we want to talk about what really are you expecting to receive. So from a send standpoint, you want to make sure that the define is in XML format. You have a corresponding reviewer's guide. This is going to highlight any errors or warnings or different nuances that might be within the data. And you also will have the XPT files that must include your trial summary data set and your demography data set. For SATM, the package is very similar, except you also want to make sure you have the annotated case report form. And for your ATOM package, again, it's a similar package, but in terms of the XPT files, you want to make sure that the ADSL is there, so your subject level data set. You also need to provide any programs that were used to generate your ATOM data, in addition to any other programs you might be submitting to support tables, listings, or figures. And if you do have a study that does not meet the standardized requirement, you still want to make sure that you're submitting the simplified TS data set if necessary, and that does not need a corresponding define file or anything like that. You can just simply submit the XPT file. So in terms of the simplified trial summary data set, this is an example of the very few variables that would be found within the data set, but I highlight here where the study ID would fall. I circle this because what we want to do is, again, make sure the study ID used in the data set corresponds with the study ID you use in the metadata for your study tagging file. If they do not correspond, then there is, we'll show you in a little bit how you can update leaf titles to kind of bring the two study IDs together. But from a metadata perspective, we do recommend that the study ID in the data set matches the metadata. I can't say it enough, and it's just one of those checks and balances that you can do during your reviews. Okay, so now once you have the data packages, I suggest as soon as you can, you import them into your publishing tool. And when you do this, you really want to make sure that you do not alter any of the output names or the file names in any way. So depending on your publishing tool and how it outputs the information, I know that there are some tools out there where it takes your leaf title, and if you do not do certain steps, then it'll change the actual file name of what you place in the tool. So just be very cognizant that as you go through, all of the output names that you were provided are placed into the tool the exact same way. These are output names that CDISC recommends that you use. They are the standardized file names. If you receive packages that are not using these output names, I don't believe it's the end of the world because it's not truly corresponding to any validation criteria outside of DM and TS and ADSL. But it is something to ask your vendor or whomever passed along the packages to you, just to double check and see if you have time to update the reviewer's guide and the annotated CRF to the output names that you see here. Keeping in mind, if you change any output names, it will impact any links that are found within your define.xmls or the reviewer's guide if they're linking out. Also, for any programs, it is acceptable to use underscores, so you're right there. And in terms of the utility files, you want to make sure that XSL and CSS files are provided. Sometimes certain defined files only need an XSL. But really, if you open up the define.xml and you find that it's not reviewing properly, it's probably because you're missing a utility file. So that, again, is just another check. Go back and talk to whoever provided you the packages and see what you can do to make the update. Now, again, once the packages are in your publishing tool, we do recommend that you use descriptive leaf titles so that the agency really understands what they're being provided. Your file tags will help you match up the send, SCTM, and ATOM components. But we still always recommend that you add a little bit of a description so that, again, they might know that LB is the laboratory test results, but just in case internally you're naming it or describing it a little differently, we suggest just using the leaf title so that it provides everybody that information at a high level view. Here is also where we recommend that you can tie in 2 different study IDs if that's the case. So let's say we have a study report, and in the report it's referred to as study 123, but in your data set it's actually referred to as ABC. Your data set and the metadata should match ABC, but when you tie it together, we always say that you can put it in parentheses or just somewhere within the leaf title so that it really, from the eye point of view, it brings those 2 numbers together and it starts to make sense to everybody why they're seeing 2 different numbers. And of course, as part of the validation criteria, you want to make sure that you're using the correct standardized file tags. You see that you still have all different types of tags available to you, but when it comes to the standardized format, SCTM, send, and ATOM are your main data set tags. And then, of course, you have your annotated case report form, and defined files can be tagged as needed. So now that you have everything in your publishing tool, you've done your work, you've tagged appropriately, I still suggest you do a thorough review of the output provided to you. The first thing would be to take a look at the output folder structure. You want to make sure that it matches up with the folder structure dictated by the agency. Also, triple check your output names. Again, if any of those output names were altered in any way, it's going to lead to links that are breaking. And you might not know it from your validation report, because not all the time, depending on the validation tool you use, you're going to get warnings about broken links within a define.xml. I do suggest that you open up the define.xml and you do, whether it's 10%, 50%, 100%, whatever you're comfortable with, I do suggest that you click on links to external documents. So click on a few links for your XPT files. Click on some links that are linking out to the annotated case report form. You really just want to make sure that everything is working appropriately. Double check your leaf titles and, of course, your file tags. Open this up in a viewing tool. Make sure that all of your SCTM documents are tagged correctly and are showing up together. Same thing for send, ATOM, or really any other data packages that you might have if you're having legacy as well. Just making sure that it's viewing properly will give everybody that warm and fuzzy feeling that what you're seeing is 100% correct, and therefore what the agency sees will be correct and will lead from any confusion that might pop up. Now, I talked about just taking a look at the study of the folder structure. So this is the folder structure that it should comply with. Again, depending on your publishing tool, it might build it out for you, or maybe it's a little bit manual. I would assume that it builds out properly for you. If it does not, it's just something to go back and discuss with the owner of that tool, just to see if there's an update that you can make. Okay. And finally, validate, validate, validate. I cannot say this enough. you want to validate your submission as often as possible. If you get a study of data in it and you're waiting on 3 other packages, validate that one study of data. Make sure that everything is looking good and comes out appropriate with your validation criteria. Keep in mind, depending on the validation tool that you're using, the technical rejection criteria might not be implemented yet, because as you saw when we discussed them earlier, the implement date is still TBD. So if your validation tool is not utilizing that criteria just yet, that does make sense. So it's just another idea to do a manual check and just say, yes, the packages that we have will go through validation just fine once the criteria is implemented. All right, so now that you have these validated packages and your submission is all good to go, let's talk about what's the latest message from the FDA. If I had a drum roll, I would do it right now, but we're still waiting. So it's been years. For a while, was holding my breath. I've learned not to. We are still waiting for the 90-day notice, but I will say, please do not wait for them to give you the 90-day notice to start to look at your studies and take some action on bringing these studies up to date from a standardized data perspective. We have seen folks have a formal request sent to them to provide standardized data. We've even seen formal requests sent to sponsors that submitted draft reports, and the agency still wants to see the standardized data because those studies started after December 17th, 2016 for an IND, or December 17th, nope, got it wrong. December 17th, 2017 for an IND, or December 17th, 2016 for a marketing application. I had to get those dates in there one last time before we ended things. So yes, please start now. Talk to your clinical and preclinical folks. Maybe set up a call with them right after this webinar, just while it's fresh in your mind so that you can really take a look at what you have going on internally and start to map out a plan. And with that, we will look to see if there's any questions that popped up. Vanessa, anything going on out there?
Yeah, we do have a few. All right, so the first one is, do we need to submit data retroactively for study reports that were previously submitted?
Sure, so the great answer to that is no. If you have already submitted reports to an application, you do not need to go back and resubmit any data packages unless the agency has specifically asked you to. The other side of that, if you are submitting those reports to a new or different application, then you would be required to submit the data if the study start dates point you in that direction.
Great. All right, so another one. If I am only submitting a simplified TS dataset for a study, how should I tag it?
Sure, so this has come up a lot recently, especially because the standardized criteria is only flagging SCTM, ATOM, and SEND file tags. But if you are only submitting a simplified TS dataset, you can use the tabulation legacy dataset file tag.
Okay, and we have just one more. If we are not submitting data for a study, do I still need to submit a TS dataset?
Okay, so let's go back real quick. I'm going to jump back to something we covered a little bit earlier. If you are, sorry, can you say the question one more time? I want to make sure I get it right.
Sure. If we are not submitting data for a study, do I still need to submit a TS dataset?
Okay, thank you. So for CBER, you do not need to submit a TS dataset if you are not submitting any other data. For CDER, it is a little different. You do need to submit, for INDs, you need to submit the simplified data set for your non-clinical studies. And for marketing applications, you need to submit the simplified data set regardless of clinical or non-clinical if you're submitting within those specified sections.
Okay.
I hope that answered the question.
All right. That includes all of the questions that came through. So at this time, we want to thank everyone for joining us today. We covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time. So if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to us. You can see the contact information on the screen right now. We will share the link to the webinar recording once it's available on our website, and appreciate your time. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe and healthy.